Where did David go after fleeing Gath, and what was he told while there? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Samuel on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Samuel chapter 22, verses 1 to 5. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Samuel chapter 22, beginning at verse 1. David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over them. And there were about 400 men with him. And then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me." So he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go to the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. At the end of the last chapter, we had David fleeing from King Saul and coming to Gath in the land of the Philistines. This was an especially dangerous move since Goliath was from Gath, and David had been battling the Philistines by now for quite some time. But that's the desperate straits David was in. He didn't know where to go in order to escape the hand of Saul. When the ruler of Gath was told who David was, David feigned being insane in order to escape from there. We discussed how what David did was lying and deception, but that the Bible wasn't stamping its approval of what David did, for it wasn't, but simply reporting what he did. Coming now to chapter 22, and we have David escaping to the cave of Adullam. From our map, we can see from Gath in the west, David would have traveled east through the Elah Valley, where he defeated Goliath, and then turned south, where the valley turns south, until he came to Adullam. Now Adullam was a city itself, but in the area there were a bunch of caves where one could hide. It is here that David is joined by many more people. Remember back to chapter 21 that David was accompanied by a small contingent of men. But here in Adullam, David's family, including his father and mother, had heard where David was. Perhaps one of these men came to tell them, and they came down to be with David. Along with them came those who were distressed, in debt, and discontented, which in the end brought their numbers to about 400. Now you have to ask yourself, why would David's family want to come and be with David? Well, Saul knew who David's family were, and so if Saul couldn't kill David, perhaps he might turn and kill David's family. Or perhaps he might use them as bargaining chips in order to ensure David's capture. David's family would have known this, and so in order to save their lives, they came to David. Why then would these other people come to David? Because they knew of David's integrity and Saul's wickedness. It wasn't Saul who defeated Goliath. It was David. And during Saul's reign, it did not appear that Saul was very good at administering the state, for they seemed to be perpetually at war with the Philistines. He himself appeared to get rich, but there were people who were in debt and couldn't live, and others who were in distress and discontented with life under King Saul, which is something the Lord warned Israel about back in chapter 8. When you step back and look at the situation, Saul was drafted as a king by Israel so that they would be like the nations around about them, a king that could lead them into battle. In this task, Saul was a mixed bag, strong at times and weak at others, but for the most part, he did do an adequate job at leading Israel into battle. But a king is more than that. A king has to ensure that their kingdom is prosperous. A king has to ensure that justice is done. A king has to unite the nation. And in these things, Saul seemingly failed every step of the way. Saul was respected when he won. But even then, Saul never seemed to possess the full respect of the people. Saul's arrogance, vindictiveness, selfishness, and cruelty played a part in the reason as to why that was the case. In short, Saul was the type of king that God warned Israel about, and Israel seemed to now be having buyer's remorse. David, on the other hand, was everything Saul wasn't. He not only was brave in battle, but he was a humble man. He was a kind man, and he showed signs of being a strong leader. So it is very easy to see why David was able to obtain such a following, even while on the run from King Saul. But with such a large following, they couldn't remain in the caves of Adullam for long, so they traveled east to Mizpah in Moab. To get there, you would have to travel east through the hill country of Judah and cross over the Dead Sea into Moab. Now, why would David go here? Well, he couldn't go west to the Philistines, for they would kill him. He didn't want to remain in Israel, for Saul would kill him. And he couldn't really go south into Edom, for he didn't have any friends there either. The only place left was Moab. Remember, Ruth was a Moabitess and in the lineage of David, so this fact might put him in the good graces of the king of Moab, which it seemingly did. David asked the king of Moab to care for his parents while he was on the run until he knew what God would do for him in delivering him from Saul. By this time, David's parents were quite old, and so a life on the run would not have been possible for them. So that David sought to care for his parents here is a testament to his faithfulness, for all righteous people honor their father and mother at all stages of their lives. The king of Moab agreed to do this, and it seems that Jesse and his mother remained in Moab for the entirety of David's run from King Saul. However, Scripture doesn't confirm this, as this will be the last time that Jesse is mentioned of as alive in either 1st or 2nd Samuel. David, though, couldn't remain in Moab. God made sure of that by sending Gad, a prophet, to tell him this. Why would God not want David to remain in Moab? Because David couldn't be made king from Moab. David needed to be among his people, earning a reputation that would allow him to become king upon Saul's death. He thus needed to be in Israel, and so God commanded David to return to Judah. David and his company thus came back and went to the forest of Hereth, a possible location of which is now on the screen. While all this is going on, Saul is up to something else related to the event in chapter 21. We'll take up with that, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Samuel chapter 22, verses 6 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.